All right, students, long time no see. I hope you're doing all right at home in this adventure of a springtime. So what I'm here to do right now is to talk about a little how to read Aristotle. So Aristotle is a famously difficult author to read, so difficult that I actually am assigning rather little original Aristotle work for you to read. You have a book uh, with which you can explore other avenues, other things that he's written. He has a very large corpus, obviously. And if you're writing on Aristotle for your term paper, you're going to want to look at a lot of these primary texts. But how do you do it? Because it's hard to read Aristotle. He's a challenging author. And he writes in a very distinctive way, but not necessarily a very accessible way. So here are some suggestions. What we're going to be doing is looking at a particular section of the text. We're going to be looking at De Interpretatione, and we're going to be looking at really the first few pages of that text to try and figure out how I would approach it and how I recommend you would approach it when you read a section of Aristotle. So here we go. This is the very beginning of this text, which means on interpretation, but also it's basically a work of logic. It's one of Aristotle's logical works where he tries to understand what meaning is, how meaning is established, and in particular how sentences work, how language works, and how language communicates meaning. So off the bat, we have here, he says, first we must settle what a name is and what a verb is, and then what a negation, an affirmation, a statement, and a sentence are. So this is classic Aristotle. He wants to get his terms straight. He wants to try and say, here's how I'm going to use this term, how I'm going to use that term. And when we get these terms straight, he's going to suggest that these are the terms that are relevant to understanding the subject matter, whatever the subject matter may be. So in the beginning of the physics, he's going to try and explain the fundamental terms that he thinks are important to understanding nature. In the rhetoric, he's going to, at the beginning, explain the fundamental terms that are relevant to understanding persuasion and the use of language to persuade. So here he wants to get clear on name, verb, negation, affirmation, statement, and sentence. He says, now spoken sounds are symbols of affections in the soul, and written marks symbols of spoken sounds. Now you look at this sentence and you might be like, okay, I understand what spoken sounds are. And he says, are symbols. Okay, I understand what symbols are. But then we get to this part where he says affections in the soul. And if you're thinking rationally, you may just want to stop right there and say, what? Sorry. Affections in the soul. You might say, what is going on here? What is an affection in the soul? And that's the key question. And right now, you just have that to work with. So you're going to sort of flag it. You're going to perhaps underline it and say, okay, I need to figure out what is meant here. And right now, I have no particular clue. The next part says written marks, symbols of spoken sounds. Well, I know what that means. When we have written words, those are symbols of the spoken words, the sounds that we make. Okay, so we'll continue on and we'll try and look for what affections in the soul might mean. And he says, and just as written marks are not the same for all men, neither are spoken sounds. Okay, figure out what this means. Written marks are not the same for all men. Now, this probably just means different people write letters differently. They look a little bit different. Different handwriting is different. Neither are spoken sounds. Not everyone's spoken words sound exactly the same. But then he says, but what these are, in the first place, signs of affections in the soul, are the same for all. And what these affections are likenesses of actual things are also the same. Now, here's where you get that part that you highlighted above, and you get to think, oh, now I can understand what's going on here. Because I look at it and I say, but what these are signs of, affections in the soul, are the same for all. So now Aristotle is telling us that written marks and spoken sounds, the language, are signs for affections in the soul, and that these affections are likenesses of real things. So you say, okay, I have a cell phone. And then I say, okay, this is the actual thing, right? What is the affection in the soul? Well, it would be some experience that I have of the cell phone that isn't the thing itself. My experience of the cell phone is probably something mental. So we can say when he says affections in the soul, it's some sort of mental, sometimes it's called sense data, experiences. Those are the things. He says those are the same for everyone. We all have the same types of experiences. And the things, like the phone, are the same for everyone. What's different are the way the words sound. And in fact, we might have one word that means, or two words that mean the same thing, such as hat and chapeau, the French word for hat. He says, these matters have been discussed in the work on the soul and do not belong to the present subject. Okay, so now I know if I want to know more about that, I go to the work on the soul, which is called On the Soul. Just as some thoughts in the soul are neither true nor false, while some are necessarily one or the other, so with spoken sounds. For false and truth have to do with combination and separation. Thus, names and verbs by themselves, for instance, man or white, when nothing further is added, are like the thoughts that are without combination and separation. For so far, they are neither true nor false. So there's something he's saying here that cannot be true or false, and it seems to be things like white or man, or cookie, right? So if someone says to you, cookie, does it make sense for you to respond true or false, right? You probably think there must be some sort of verb going on. Cookie can't be true, but there is a cookie. That could be true. I like cookies. That could definitely be true. So then he continues, a sign of this is that even goat stag signifies something, but not as yet anything true or false, unless is or is not is added. So once we have the word goat stag, that obviously indicates something. That particular goat stag over there that's on the street outside my house. Why is there a goat stag outside my house? Anyway, that indicates something, but it does not say anything of the thing, so it cannot be true or false. So this is just how Aristotle communicates, and if you slow down, you take it apart, you look for the definitions, you get clear on each term, you're going to get a lot out of Aristotle. But if you stop doing that, you'll get lost really easily. So another section here. This is section 4. A sentence is a significant spoken sound, some part of which is significant in separation, as an expression, not as an affirmation. So there's sentence is a significant spoken sound. So significant means it has some sort of meaning. It indicates something. Here's a spoken sound that doesn't indicate anything. Right? Doesn't indicate anything at all. But here's a spoken sound that indicates something. The goat stag on the street outside wants a cookie. Right? That's a spoken sound that some part of it is significant in separation. Say goat stag is, cookie is. Even though those parts are not affirmations. There's only one affirmation in a sentence, the way we're looking at it right here, it's sort of simple sentence. He says, I mean that animal, for instance, signifies something, but not that it is or it is not. We're not talking about the animal existing, though it will be an affirmation or negation if something is added. The single syllables of animal, on the other hand, signify nothing. The single syllables ni, and mul, those aren't signifiers. So we have to have some sort of noun, some sort of signifying term in order to get a sentence. Nor is the ice and mice significant. Here it is simply a spoken sound, even though ice could be significant. The fact that ice is stuck in there inside the word mice, it's not significant. Every sentence is significant, not as a tool, as we said, but by convention. But not every sentence is a statement-making sentence, but only those in which there is truth or falsity. There is not truth or falsity in all sentences. A prayer is a sentence, but is neither true nor false. So he wants to say there are some types of sentences that can be true or false, and there are other types of sentences that cannot be true or false. So, for example, if I say to the goat stag, go get me a cookie, right? You can't say go get me a cookie is true or false, right? You could talk about whether the goat stag obeys or not. I'm imagining the goat stag would not in fact obey, especially since there is no actual goat stag. I hate to break that to you guys. He says the present investigation deals with statement-making sentence, with the statement-making sentence. The others we can dismiss. He says, well, I'm not going to talk about things like commands or prayers as a subject of this work. So we've got one more section that I want us to look at here. Now he's defining another set of terms, this time very critical terms in the study of Aristotle, the terms universal and particular. He says, now of actual things, some are universal, others particular. I call universal that which is by its nature predicated of a number of things, and particular that which is not. Man, for instance, is universal, Callias, a particular. So here, notice that there's a very significant thing going on in the parentheses. Parentheses in Aristotle do not mean that what's within the parentheses is less important. Oftentimes, it's more important. He will put definitions in parentheses. He will also put examples in parentheses. Whenever Aristotle gives you an example, grab hold of it for dear life, because sometimes Aristotle moves so quickly that you won't know what's going on. But then if he gives you an example, you'll be able to stop and say, oh, okay, let me think about this example and see if I can use the content of the example to understand the general claim that he made right before he gave the example. So in this case, the example that he gives is that man is a universal, Callias is a particular. So this is worth exploring in more detail. But for now, we can look at man as being a universal because there are multiple people who fall under that category of man. So Callias is a man. Socrates is a man. George Costanza, well, is a fictional man. So man can refer to any number of things at once. It's not like they hand it over. They pass on the baton. I'm the man now, and then you can be the man next week. Callias is a man, but Callias is a particular individual, right? A particular individual you can point to and say, that is the whole thing. That is Callias. So that is Dan Propson, right? The particular thing. So the example here carries a lot. And he says the universal can be predicated of a number of things at once, whereas the particular cannot. Then he says, so it must sometimes be of a universal that one states that something holds or does not, sometimes of a particular. He's saying you can form sentences, meaningful sentences, about the properties of universals or the properties of particulars, right? When we say, he says, one states that something holds. That means that there's a claim, a sentence that makes a claim. It says, now if one states universally of a universal that something holds or does not, there will be contrary statements. Examples of what I mean by stating universally of a universal are, every man is white, no man is white. Every deer stag likes cookies, right? That would be stating something universally of a universal. But when one states something when one states something of a universal but not universally, these statements are not contrary, though what is being revealed may be contrary. Examples of what I mean by stating of a universal not universally are, a man is white, a man is not white. Man is a universal, but is not used universally in the statement. For every does not signify the universal, but that it is taken universally. So slowing down here, he's trying to make a point about what the definition of stating a universal but not universally is. So we can make statements about the universal that are like every cookie has chocolate chips. There's a false statement about the universal. But we could state of a universal. We could talk of a universal, not universally, because we could pick out a particular member of that class. So we say a cookie has chocolate chips. There is a cookie that has chocolate chips. Notice we're talking about a universal, the universal concept of cookie. But by picking out a cookie has chocolate chips, we're saying there is at least one thing that falls under this category of universal that has this property. So then he continues, it is not to predicate a universal universally of a subject, for there cannot be an affirmation in which a universal is predicated universally of a subject. For instance, every man is every animal. Now he's saying that that sentence makes no sense. Every man is every animal. We are trying to universally predicate something of a universal for the particular subject, every man, but it's just not possible. We can't do that. That sentence makes no sense when we look at it. So that is just a little introduction that I wanted you to have to how to read individual passages within Aristotle. Hopefully that'll help you. Really watch for the definitions, watch for the examples, get very clear on what's being said before you move on. Or if you don't know something that's being said, get very clear on what it is that you don't know, so that later as you're reading, if something comes up using that same phrase, especially the particular exact phrase, you can go back and say, oh, this later passage illuminates the earlier passage. With that, happy reading Aristotle, folks.